Which is to traditional philosophical problem is something that really has started to work on seriously in the last year. So it's really a topic that is very close to my heart. And I decided to present something that I hope is pretty much on the special topic of the conference, while at the same time presenting something that is really, in many respects, a very close development of the talk I presented as the result of my postdoctoral fellowship here 15 years ago, so that you local guys can see what I've been up to in the last 15 years. Okay, so the topic is about a specific problem of changing, which I'm going to introduce. And the main idea is to address this problem using a specific non-classical logic. So the structure of the talk is going to be as follows. The first section is setting up the problem and mentioning some previous attempts at a solution. The second section is going to be a sort of the two. In fact, it's a repetition of what of the talk I gave here 15 years ago. It's basically because my solution to this problem of changing is going to involve a certain classical logic justified from a certain metaphysical perspective. I'm going to, since I cannot assume that all of you are on board with these ideas, in the second section, I'm going to present the non-classical logic and its metaphysical foundation with the original application, which was not to the problem of change, but to the problem of truth and the semantic paradoxes. So that's required for you to get up to speed with the philosophical and technical ideas that will be used in the third section, where I'm going to show how these basically the same conceptual and technical tools can also be useful in presenting hopefully new solution to this problem of changing. And I'm going to present first like the bare bones approach, and then I really like to take the last minutes to also present some, I think, interesting development that can be made of the core approach. So that's the plan. So I like to open this talk always with a couple of quotes, especially the second one, because it's I think by the end of the talk it's going to be quite inspirational. So it's a quote from Book Gamma of the Metaphysics of Aristotle. So Aristotle is talking about pre-Socratics, in particular about the followers of Heraclitus. Further, they were seeing all these natures changing, but there is nothing true about what's in becoming. It's indeed not possible to say anything true about what is through and through in becoming. In fact, from this assumption blossomed the most extreme doctrine of those who have been mentioned. That is, those who profess to follow Heraclitus, and such as the one had by Cratylus, who ended up thinking that one should not say anything, but only move this finger to describe change, and rebuked Heraclitus for saying that it's not possible to step twice in the same river, for he himself thought it was not possible even once. Okay, so I'll keep this in mind, and by the end of the talk, hopefully you're going to see how I'm trying to improve on what Cratylus did. All right, well, let's start with introducing the problem in the detail. So the general topic already says the problem is change in general, and by change I mean every process of becoming. So every process where something intuitively becomes something else, maybe because the same thing acquires different properties, or maybe because the one thing disappears and another thing comes into being. So every kind of becoming. And of course this notion is central, at least to traditional philosophy, as presents a lot of problems in a lot of directions. And the aim of this talk is not to give a systematic account of the phenomenon of change. It's just to focus in a very specific fashion on a very specific problem that change gives rise to, which is basically is the problem of describing the status of an object at the time when the object is changing from one state to the other state, which for those of you who are familiar with ancient philosophy is the problem of Plato's excitedness moment in the Parmenides, the problem of the instant or the moment of change. But if you don't know it, don't worry, I'm going to present you what I think is a rational reconstruction of what that problem is. And I'm going to call it, to distinguish from problems of change, in general I'm going to call it the paradox of changing. So what is this paradox of changing? So again, it's useful to keep in mind a particular example. So let's take a ball, call it B, and suppose that it's changing from the state of rest to the state of motion. So for example, the ball is at rest, and then someone kicks the ball, and the ball starts moving, as we say. So we want to think about the time t, which can be anything, can be an interval, can be a point, whatever. Time t, when the ball is changing from rest to motion. And our question is focusing on this time t. At t, what is the ball doing? How should we describe the ball at time t? And it seems that in the relevant respects, which are rest, motion, and related properties. So it seems the ball is an ordinary ball, it's nothing magical, so it seems that as every normal physical object, there are only two relevant properties it can have. Either it's at rest or it's in motion. And this property seems to be exhaustive. It must have always one or the other, so also t must have one or the other, but they're also exclusive. If it's at rest, it's not in motion. If it's in motion, it's not at rest. So we know that at t, the ball is either, by exhaustivity of rest and motion, the ball is either at rest or in motion. And the question now becomes, which one of the two? We know it's a disjunction, so it must be one of the two. Which one? So let's examine the paradox continues by examining the two options. Let's suppose that at t, the ball is at rest. But if it's at rest at t, then by exclusivity of rest and motion, it follows that it's not in motion. So at t, the ball would be at rest, still at rest, and not already in motion. But if the ball is still at rest and not yet in motion, it really doesn't seem it's changing from rest to motion. It seems we are talking about a time that comes earlier than the time of changing. Our supposition is that we are talking about the time of changing, not about an earlier time. So if the ball is at rest, it really seems that we are talking about a moment that comes before the moment of changing. So it's not, for this reason, it's not a good option. But we have a totally analogous problem if we suppose instead that at t the ball is in motion. Because if it's in motion, by exclusivity of rest and motion, it's not at rest. So it seems to follow it's already in motion and no longer at rest. But if the ball is already in motion and no longer at rest, it seems this time that we are talking about a time later than the real time of changing. The ball is already in motion and no longer at rest. So it's already moving. So this time we are talking about a later time than the time we are supposed to be talking about. So either ways, we kind of miss the moment of changing. But these were the only two options. We had the disjunction that the ball is at rest or is in motion. And now we see that either option leads to a problem in this context where we want to talk about a time of changing. So that's the problem. Only two options, but either option seems bad. A very informal presentation, but I think it gets to the essential. Then we see we're going to formalize it a bit more later. But for the time being, it's enough. So that's the problem. Now in the paper, there follows a long discussions about a long survey about possible ways of blocking or solving the paradox. And the presentation is informal, but it's already regimented enough so that you can see the several steps that are made in the argumentation. And basically, for every step that are made in the argumentation, one can try to solve the paradox by rejecting the step. So one, for example, can reject, for example, Plato's solution seems to have been in the Parmenides to reject the disjunction, to say, no, it's not at a special moment of change. It's not true to say that the ball is at rest. It's not true to say that the ball is in motion or something like that. So one can reject that kind of disjunction, for example. So because of lack of time, we can't really survey all the solutions. Given several talks that have been given in this conference, I thought possibly the most interesting thing to discuss briefly before moving on to my own approach is to discuss a kind of dialectic, paraconsistent approach to this problem. So that's what that's why don't worry about all these points, because that's what's going to happen on a few occasions. We just jump to very briefly discuss. I want to very briefly discuss what a dialectic approach to this problem could be. And present some reasons for being a bit skeptical about the success of this approach. In fact, it's not a product of my imagination. It's an approach that Grand Prix has developed in very interesting detail in his In Contradiction book. So the way to understand the dialectic approach, given the way I set out the problem, is basically just to say, look, when you say that we assume that the ball is, for example, in the first horn of the dilemma, the ball is at rest, and we derive that then is still at rest and not yet in motion. You think that is incompatible with the ball changing, because you think that if it's not yet in motion, that's incompatible with being in motion. But once you're open to true contradiction, the fact that it's not yet in motion might be compatible with also being in motion. So that the option that the ball is at rest will actually not be such a bad option, because we might still be talking about the time of changing. There's some skirmish that one can make here, but I like to present really two main problems that I see with this approach. So the first problem starts from the observation that the natural way of developing the approach that you also have in Priest is to say that, at least in this context of the ball moving and so on, basically it's not just a necessary condition that the ball is at rest and in motion at the same time. It's also a sufficient condition. So basically the change from rest to motion is the fact that we have basically the contradiction that at that time the ball is both at rest and in motion, in addition to not being in motion. But here again, one must make some choices about the logic. But if the logic is something like the standard paraconsistent logic LP, the one that was presented also in the previous talk, in the previous and second last talk, we have the fact that not only we have, because of exclusivity of rest and motion, not only we have that the ball can be at rest and in motion, but it's also always the case that it's not the case that the ball is at rest and in motion. So the contradiction is also denied. But if the contradiction is what the changing consists in, if we also assert the negation of that contradiction, we basically, and we do that always, we basically say that it's also always the case that the ball is not changing from rest to motion. And that's, I submit, that's already an unwelcome consequence, because it's at the moment of changing, there is ambivalence in whether the ball is at rest, ambivalence in whether the ball is in motion, but it doesn't seem to be an ambivalence in whether the ball is changing. At the time of changing, the ball is just plain changing. There's no contradiction about that, but on the standard way of developing the dialectic approach, there is a contradiction also about that. At the time of changing, the ball is also not changing. So that seems an undesired consequence. But then it goes further, no? Because if that's what being both in a state and in its contradictory state is what changing consists in, at least in this context, then if the ball is changing and not changing, we get that at the time of changing, the ball is also changing from one state of changing to the other one. Now, it's not clear whether it's changing from changing to not changing, or whether it's changing from not changing to changing. That's an issue that also we're going to explore on my own approach later on. So let's just say that in addition to changing from rest to motion, let's just assume that it's changing from not changing, from not first order changing to first order changing. And of course, this will go further up the hierarchy, exactly for the same reason. So we have all around the hierarchy, we always have changing from not changing at the lower order to changing at the lower order. But it's, let's fix on the idea that it's changing from not changing to changing. There's also, it's not that it just seems baroque as a result. It seems a conceptual solecism when you think about the changing, because we start that the ball is not changing, then it starts changing, and we are saying that at that moment it's also changing from not changing to changing. Then you expect that if it's changing from not changing to changing, you expect that at the end of the process we get the state where it's going to. So if it's going from not changing to changing, we expect that at the end of the process it's arriving to a state of changing. But that's exactly what we don't have. At the end of the process of changing from not changing to changing, the ball is just not changing. So you say it's changing from not changing to changing, but then at the end, we don't get that it's changing, we get that it's not changing. So like say it's changing from A to B, but then after the change is not B, is A. That seems a conceptual solecism. But that's what happens in this construction. Okay, that's the kind of dialectic of the first problem. Second problem, I think it's also general, but I think it's for our purposes, we can just give a particularly nice and cute example. So suppose instead of taking the change from rest to motion, just take the change from being in one position to being in another position. So like movement. Movement is changed from one position to another position. So just suppose we have a kind of unidimensional rod that is changing from being in this position to being in this other position. Then at the time of changing or moving from this place, so this is one place and this is the other place. When it's moving from this place to this place, according to the dialecticist approach, the rod is really in both places. So it's both here and it's both here. So question, how long, suppose this is the length here in this place is 1 meter, and also here it's 1 meter, and suppose that this one is one decimeter, this difference between the two places. So question, at the time of changing, if the rod is both in this place and this place, how long is the rod? Well, natural measure of length is that you take the leftmost part, which at the time of changing is here, and then you calculate how long it is up until you arrive at the rightmost part. But the rightmost part at the time of changing is not here. It's here because it's also at this place. So you can go further up to here. So it would be 1 meter and 1 decimeter long when it's changing. A rod that is intuitively seen is just 1 meter. So we kind of, so here to make a bit of a pun, I said in special relativity with movement relative to the frame of reference, we have a length contraction. Here in dialectic physics, we have a length expansion. When objects move, they will usually become longer because of this contradiction in wholly occupying two places at the same time. So that's a very odd and counterintuitive consequence in this particular case. As I mentioned, it can actually be generalized to a lot of cases of change, but it's, for our purposes, this is enough. Okay, so this is just a brief discussion to make some problem for a dialectic approach. Let's move on in a more positive spirit now to my own favorite approach. But as I said, in order to really explain my approach, it's useful to do a detour through the liar paradox that will allow me to introduce both technical and conceptual tools that are going to be used in my own proposal. So for the next 10 minutes, we're gonna think a bit about the liar paradox, and then we come back to the problem of changing. All right. So liar paradox is, for our purposes, particularly useful presentation. So suppose we have two predicates, T and F for truth and falsity, and for every sentence phi, we also have a name in the language that we denote by putting phi within corner quotes. And suppose also that somehow or other we have a very direct form of self-reference. So in particular, we have a sentence lambda that uses the falsity predicate as a singular term, applies it to a singular term that refers to lambda itself. So basically, lambda says of itself that is false. That's enough to give rise to a version of the liar paradox. Here it goes. By exhaustivity of truth and falsity, we are asking whether lambda is true or false, and we know that it's either true or false by exhaustivity of truth and falsity. Okay, so it must be either true or false. So let's see which one it can be. So let's start with the supposition that lambda is true. If lambda is true, by exclusivity on truth and falsity, lambda is not false. But remember, lambda just is the sentence that lambda is false. So not false lambda, that's just the same sentence as not lambda. So if lambda is true, we would have a situation where a sentence is true, but also we have the negation of that sentence. And that seems to contradict the laws of truth, right? If we have that something is not the case, we cannot have that a sentence that says that is true. It must be false instead. Okay, so on the first option, the lambda is true, we get this violation of the laws of truth. But what happens if we suppose instead the lambda is false? Now again, by exclusivity of truth and falsity, if lambda is false, is not true, but remember, lambda is false just is the sentence lambda. So we will end up in the situation where we have a sentence that is the case, lambda, but lambda, the sentence, is not true. So a situation where something is the case, but a sentence that says so is not true, which again seems to be incompatible with the laws of truth. But these are the only two options. So either options are bad, so we get a problem. Let's start to understand a bit more what's going on by introducing a bit of formalism. So I'm going to use basically some sort of intuitive sequence calculus presentation of the problem. So this is just simply to regiment a bit the previous reasoning we've seen. So this is basically, we can only focus on the first part of the reason, when we assume the lambda is true and we derive a problem. The lambda is true, but also not lambda. How do we get to this bad result? Now here's a more fine-grained analysis, or this more formal analysis. We assume the lambda is true, so of course lambda is true, then we have the lambda is true by reflexivity. But if lambda is true, I said by exclusivity of truth and falsity, that's going to entail that lambda is not false. And lambda is not false, that just is the sentence not lambda, as we construct it. So then the idea of the paradox was to put together these two things. No? The lambda is true, but not lambda. How do we put together these two results? In a formal presentation, that was very hidden and quick. But let's do it with more discernment. Where we have one assumption gives us the lambda is true, and another assumption gives us not lambda. So if we want to put them together by a standard principle of conjunction, we should take both premises, T lambda and T lambda, put them together, and that, yes, is going to give us the conjunction of the two conclusions. So we get that bad conjunction by putting together the two premises. But that means that at least immediately, the bad conjunction, the lambda is true but not lambda, doesn't follow from lambda is true in itself. It follows from lambda is true taken twice. To move from that to say, oh, then the bad conjunction already follows from lambda is true in itself, we need to, as people say, contract the two occurrences of lambda is true into a single occurrence as a premise. And that's the move that in logic is called, in substructural logic, is called the principle of contraction. So here we discover a hidden step in the argument that wasn't really apparent in the more informal presentation, this contraction step. The hypothesis that lambda is true gives us a bad conjunction only if we use contraction. If we don't use contraction, then we don't get the back conjunction out of T lambda in itself. We only get it out of two occurrences of T of lambda. So one idea, at least from a purely formal point of view, is to block the paradox by blocking this step. Say, well, if we reject contraction, then we no longer have that the supposition that lambda is true results in a bad conclusion, and the paradox gets stuck there. And that's enough to block the paradox. Now, that's seen from a purely formal point of view. Now, since we are interested in a philosophical solution, if we really want to give a complete solution, we should also explain why contraction fails. Because contraction is apparently intuitive, so if we want to give a philosophical solution, we should give a philosophical account of what it is about lambda, T of lambda, that makes contraction fail. Okay. So that's the move I proposed 15 years ago. And it's basically taking, if you think in a sequent calculus style, it's basically taking the standard rules for the classical operations, and then in terms of structural rule, simply the reflexivity of consequence, commutativity of premises and conclusion, monotonicity of premises and conclusion, and then, because we are talking about truth, also adding certain principles about truth that kind of capture the naive idea of truth. For those of you that are into substructural logics, basically the resulting logic, for this reason I call ICKT, is a multiplicative affine logic plus the rules for truth. Okay, but that's not very important. What's more important for our purposes is as I said, the philosophical motivation for why contraction fails. And that's something that I try to do a bit later. And is a metaphysical explanation I already mentioned in the introduction of the talk, where I'm basically trying to argue that we can get failure of contraction at the logical level if we suppose that at a more metaphysical level of what's expressed by the relevant sentences, we have a certain instability. Okay, so let me explain this. So the framework is, I think it's similar to the one that John was using yesterday. I'm going to assume that a syntactic sentence expresses what you might call a proposition, but maybe it's more useful to think of it as a state of affairs, something that can be the case or cannot be the case, but doesn't need to have all the fineness of grain of a representation like a proposition. So for this reason, I prefer to think of sentences as expressing states of affairs in this context. In the slide, because it's a bit long to write, I say states of affairs by simply writing essay. Okay. So sentences express states of affairs. I want to say certain states of affairs are unstable. What does it mean to say that they're unstable? Here we need to introduce another notion, which also was very important yesterday, which I take it to be basically the same. I just use a different words because of a reason I can explain a bit later. Basically a notion of grounding, which is what actually before Hume was called causation in philosophy. It was this very, very general notion of causation. After Hume, we only apply to, standardly, we only apply to what Aristotle would call natural efficient causation, but before Hume was simply every case where a certain fact determines the other fact. It's prior and determines the other fact. So for example, we also say that the fact that something is purple causes that it's red, or the axiom of piano arithmetic cause that there are infinitely many prime numbers, or whatever. Also apply to these non-natural cases. Okay, so I'm using this very general notion of causation. It's basically like grounding, but Because I want to use this notion of instability, maybe grounding is not the best terminological choice in this context. So what is instability in this context? It's a property of a state of affairs, and is a property that a state of affairs has, just in case it causes a state of affairs with which it does not co-obtain. Now, this notion is very intuitive when we think about actually natural causation. So take the state of affairs that the wood is burning, that causes the state of affairs that only ashes remain, but doesn't co-obtain with it. Once we have the only ashes remain, we no longer have that the wood is burning. There's no wood anymore. So by this definition, that the state of affairs that the wood is burning is unstable, because it causes these other states of affairs with which it doesn't co-obtain. My idea is that once a state of affairs is unstable in this sense, then the sentence that expresses a state of affairs, we can see that that sentence fails to contract. How do we see that? Well, what we basically see immediately is not so much the failure of contraction, it's the failure of this other principle that, for now hopefully clear reason, I'm going to call the principle of persistence. That basically says if a premise entails a conclusion, then it also entails the conclusion conjoined with itself. If we suppose, like in this schema, the phi, well, this maybe I can write it. So suppose the phi expresses a state of affairs S that is unstable. Is unstable exactly with respect to a state of affairs T. S causes T but doesn't co-obtain with T. And suppose that T is expressed by psi. And here we have this relation of causation. Now, if a causation from S to T, then naturally, if it's a basic case of causation, we like that our relational logical consequence captures that. So the sentence that expresses the cause entails the sentence that expresses the effect. So we're going to have the phi entails psi. So we're going to have the antecedent of persistence. But are we going to have the phi entails the conjunction of itself with psi? Well, again, phi expresses states of affairs S. Phi and psi express the combination of S and T. Natural understanding of conjunction expresses the combination of the states of affairs expressed by the conjuncts. But as I said, S is unstable by supposition. S is unstable with respect to T. It doesn't co-obtain with T. So we're not going to have S together with T. So we're not going to have the conjunction. But then this doesn't seem to be a valid entailment, because S is a perfectly possible state of affairs. And if it's realized, we wouldn't expect to get ST as well, because to get the conjunction, because the conjunction expresses S together with T, and we never have S together with T. So we go from something possible to something impossible. That doesn't seem a good entailment. But this we do have, because we have the S is possible and causes T, which is possible. So we can have this, but we might not have this one. So the principle of persistence fails if we have instability in the state of affairs expressed by the premise. But if we have this, if we have contraction, we would be able to derive persistence. Because I can write it here, because if we have phi entails itself, and if we have also the phi entails psi, by using the principle of conjunction we've already seen, we have that phi taken twice entails the conjunction, and if we have contraction, then we do have the phi entails the conjunction of itself with psi. So since this is obvious, then we have a route to go from this one to this one. So if we have contraction, we can prove persistence. So if we don't have persistence, then we better not have contraction. So that's the argument. So since instability explains why we don't have persistence, then immediately instability explains why we don't have contraction, because contraction will give us back persistence. All right, so that's the philosophical story that tries to justify why contraction fails. What's left to argue in the context of the semantic paradox is that we do have instability, because it's only instability now that gives us justification to reject contraction. So we need to justify that we have instability in the case of the semantic paradox. And here again, I refer to what John said yesterday. Now using up arrows to express the state of affairs expressed by the sentence within the up arrows, a very plausible principle of semantic assent is that the fact that something is the case causes that the sentence that says so is true. We apply this to lambda, we get the lambda causes T of lambda, but of course lambda is just a sentence, the sense of itself that is false, and that's obviously incompatible with this being true. So lambda causes something, T of lambda, with which it doesn't co-obtain, because they're incompatible. So that already shows that the state of affairs expressed by lambda is unstable by the definition of instability, and we know that instability makes contraction fail. So now we have a justification for rejecting contraction in this case. Okay, that's very briefly, is not important. So I'm going to call the the whole package at the formal level, non-contractive logic. At the philosophical level, justification of failure of contraction in terms of instability. I'm going to call this whole package the abebiotic approach, or the abebiotic theory, because abebaios in Greek means bebaios means stable, so abebaios means unstable. So it's always nice to have a Greek name for your view, so that's why I went for it, also because of this kind of traditional ancient context. I thought it was, I think it's a good name. Okay, so now the idea is simply to think, when we think about the time of changing, and once you become familiar and comfortable with this notion of instability, the natural idea is to suppose that also at the time of changing we have instability of the relevant states of affairs. Now, using the same notation for denoting a state of affairs, no? It seems a good way of capturing the dynamism that we have at the time of changing, to think that at that time, the state of affairs that B is at rest causes the state of affairs that B is in motion. If B is at rest, that already generates, suffices for its being in motion. And vice versa, at the time of changing, the state of affairs that B is in motion causes, if it obtains, causes the state of affairs that B is at rest. In a more backward-looking way, like if it's in motion at the time of changing, that still requires, or is still a necessary condition for that B is at rest. Okay, so that we have this two-way causation between B is at rest and B is in motion. Now, I want to be clear, this is not a claim about natural causation, because this is not very plausible, especially in the backward direction. In a natural sense, it's not plausible to say that something being in motion causes there is a rest, especially if it was a rest earlier time. So it's not a claim about natural causation, it's a claim about metaphysical causation, about determination, about generation of a state of affairs and a preservation of a state of affairs, but in a metaphysical sense, not in terms of laws of nature. So that's just to clarify that. Okay, so that's the basic idea. Philosophically, to understand the time of changing is dynamism in terms of this two-way causation between the start state and the end state of the change. Now let's see, since we had this, well, this is plausible, but let's see whether this idea helps us in diffusing the paradox of changing. And to do this, we need to, again, introduce a bit of logical formalism. So let's use naturally these two predicates, R and M, to mean that the object is at rest and that the object is in motion, respectively. Now, since we have instability, we know that we are going to have a non-contractive logic. Let's just suppose that we have basically the same background logic that we had in the case of the semantic paradoxes. So the ICK logic, and we add to it, just as in the case of the semantic paradoxes, we add the laws of truth. Now we should add a law of change to capture the dynamism between rest and motion at the time of changing. Since we have causation from rest to motion and from motion to rest, it's natural, again, to capture this at the logical level in terms of entailment. And these are the two principles of change I'm introducing here. So we're going to add to the basic ICK logic these two, if you want to call it, extra-logical entailments, material entailments, from B's being at rest to B's being in motion, and vice versa, from B's being in motion to B's being at rest. Now let's also, since we are dealing with these predicates, and to give their intended interpretation, let's also stipulate that they are exhaustive and exclusive. So in a multiple conclusion framework, that basically means that from the empty collection, you always get either that the ball is at motion or is at rest. So this gets you exhaustivity, and by dually, we're going to say that to say that it's in motion and to say that it's also at rest, it entails the empty collection, which means that it's an inconsistent pair of claims. So that captures the exclusivity of rest and motion. Okay, so we have these four non-purely logical principles to our logic, and the result, I'm going to call it the ICK-CH logic, for CH for changing. Now, basically, once we have this principle, basically we get that rest becomes equivalent with not rest, and motion becomes equivalent with not motion. Which is fine because we are simply talking about the time of changing. This is not about every time, it's only about the time of changing. In particular, we can prove now in the logic that the claim that the ball is at rest and not yet in motion is inconsistent. And we can also prove its twin claim, that the claim that the ball is in motion and no longer at rest is also inconsistent, which were the two bad conclusions that we had in the paradox of changing. We suppose that the ball is at rest, so we get the bad conclusion that it's at rest and not yet in motion. And I said it's a bad conclusion, and I just left it at an intuitive level. Now the logic vindicates that. The logic says, yeah, in fact, this conjunction of claims is inconsistent. But then it seems that the logic now is validating too much. It seems the logic is validating all the principles and steps that we were using when we set up the paradox of changing. It gives us the initial disjunction, either the ball is at rest or it's in motion. It gives us that these conjunctions are bad, that the ball is at rest and no longer in motion, or it's in motion and no longer at rest. And also validates reasoning by cases, which was implicit in the final step of the argument. So it seems that this logic is validating all the steps of the paradox of changing. So we might have got too strong a logic. But now again, this is the time to do a bit of formalization of the paradox of changing. And once we do the formalization, we're going to discover that there was an implicit hidden step in that argument. And in fact, if you think about that, that was a bit quick, but this is structurally identical to the presentation I gave of the liar paradox. And the presentation of the first part of reasoning, if you remember, was this one. Well, let's suppose that the ball is at rest. So by exclusivity, it's not in motion. But then it follows, we were supposing that it's at rest. So if it follows it's not in motion, then we have that the ball is still at rest and not yet in motion. Where do we get this conjunction from? Now we have to be more precise than in the informal presentation. The conjunction is only given by putting together the two premises we are using here. So we put the two premises together, we get, as in the case of the liar paradox, that the bad conjunction doesn't follow immediately from the supposition that the ball is at rest. It follows from that supposition taken twice. It's only after we apply contraction that we can really say that the supposition that the ball is at rest gives us a bad consequence. If we don't apply contraction, we don't have the bad consequence from the simple supposition that the ball is at rest. The ball may very well be at rest and changing. There's no longer this bad conjunction following from that supposition. So if we can deny contraction, we escape the paradox. And can we deny contraction? Yes, I just argued for it with the abebiotic view about the time of changing. If we buy into this, for me, intuitive idea that we have this two-way causation at the time of changing, then we do have instability with respect to the ball being at rest and the ball being in motion. So we do have a philosophical justification for claiming the contraction fails in this case. And if contraction fails, we block the paradox of changing. All right. So that's basically the idea. Let me take the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, you have a 10 minutes.
Yeah, try. Let me take the last around 10 minutes to briefly sketch one direction of research that tries to push these ideas a bit further. So we start with the observation that up to now we've been using, at the official level, we've been using simply this notion of causation, whereas there seems to be an important difference between the causation we have from rest to motion and the one that we have from motion to rest. No, I already tried to indicate it in the terminology I used. If it's changing from rest to motion, that rest is causing motion in a kind of generative way. It produces motion, whereas it's not the motion is producing rest, it's preserving rest. It's still looking back at the rest. So we seem to have two-directional notion of causation. One is forwards-looking of generation, and one is backwards-looking of some sort of preservation. So it would be nice to also in the official view to be more explicit about these two different notions of causation. And this need for distinguishing direction becomes more pressing if we try to embark in a more ambitious project, which is, at least in this context, to really try to give a definition of changing from rest to motion. Because if you think about what we have now, simply to say that, for example, rest entails motion and motion entails rest, that's totally adirectional with respect to whether you're changing from rest to motion or motion to rest. It's just the same. There's no asymmetry between the two. So it means that that's not a definition, there cannot be a sufficient condition for changing from rest to motion because it applies just as well in the opposite change from motion to rest. So we need to have more expressive resources to express the direction in which the change is going. And of course, that's of course a more ambitious project, and one might refrain from going into the project, but let's try to be ambitious and let's try to account also for this directionality of change. Notice there's the same problem that we have in the dialectic approach, because on the dialectic approach, simply saying that the ball is both at rest and in motion doesn't really tell you in which direction it's going, whether from rest to motion or vice versa. So it's I think it's a problem that appears on my approach, but also appears on at least another interesting non-classical approach. So let me briefly tell you how I would like to tackle this problem. So at the philosophical, metaphysical level, I basically already said we should basically distinguish these two types of causation. One is forward-looking, and the other one is backward-looking. Now, since it's a logic congress, let me talk more about how this metaphysical stuff reflects at the logical level. So if we want to reflect it at the logical level, then basically what you expect to have is primarily to give up the idea of commutativity of premises and conclusions. So that also connects with the Kant talk we had yesterday. And also we're going to see it in this framework. It's also natural then to give up also the principle of monotonicity. Once we do this, then when we have a sequence of premises or conclusions like this, phi 0, phi 1, phi 2, and so on, we can really read it as having a direction. So it's saying, oh, phi 0 is the case, and then it's already the case that phi 1, and then it's already the case that phi 2, and so on. So we can read premises and conclusion as describing a process in a certain direction. So that's at the structural level. But what about the operational level of connectives? Yes, very interesting. Once we have a failure of commutativity and monotonicity, then basically we have a choice about how we formulate the standard rules for connectives, because it's going to become important whether, for example, in introducing the conditional, whether we have the antecedent on the left of the premises or on the right, where is it? Or on the right of the premises. And because of it, if you have commutativity, it doesn't really matter whether you have phi and gamma, whether you have gamma and phi, but once you lose commutativity, that makes a whole world of difference. So basically, all the standard connectives are going to split into two types. Surprise, surprise, one type is going to be a type of forward-looking connectives, and the other type is going to be a type of backward-looking connectives. So for example, let's see it in the case of the implication. We're going to have a backward-looking implication. Basically, you can read it, so like this one, basically you can read it as if phi is the case, then it's still the case, the psi, where basically phi occupies a posterior position, and psi occupies an anterior position, and then you can introduce this backward-looking connective. Here, the same thing on the introducing it on the right, and then you have the forward-looking conditional that you can read as saying if phi is the case, then it's already the case. The psi, where phi occupies now an anterior position, whereas psi occupies a posterior position. Both in the introduction to the left and in the introduction on the right. It's also very interesting, perhaps the simplest case to start to get one head around this is the case of negation. We're going to have a backward-looking negation that basically says it's not yet the case that phi, and then we're going to have a forward-looking negation that says it's already not the case that phi. And that basically connects with now acceptable and non-acceptable version of excluded middle and non-contradiction. For example, this one basically when we have a gamma and delta empty, then basically the real contradiction is to say phi, and it's still not the case the phi, because now this is looking back basically to the anterior time. So this is really a contradiction. Phi and still not the case of phi. This is a real contradiction. But it's not a real contradiction to say phi and no longer phi, because we are moving towards the future, so it can be phi and then no longer phi, exactly if you're changing from phi to not phi. So now this is fine, but this is the contradiction. And this is basically what this rule gives you, and the same for excluded middle. Okay, so this is about the two negation. Now, of course, this is easier with conjunction. We're also going to have two conjunction, one that says phi and already the case of psi, and the other one that says phi and still the case of psi, with phi and psi now distributed as you might start to understand appropriately in the premises or conclusion. Totally dual considerations for disjunction. And now, interesting, we still, these connectives, these are directional, allows us to follow the flow of change. But we also want to have connectives that are more eternal, to speak like this, and we can still introduce them. For example, for us, we really only need this eternal, well, I call it extensional conjunction. And this is really a conjunction that doesn't care about the order. You can have a conjunct anywhere in the premise, and you can substitute for it the conjunction with any other conjunct, both in the first place or in the second place. Similarly, in the conclusion, you can have one conjunct anywhere in the conclusion, the other conjunct anywhere in the conclusion. You can respect the order of set premises and conclusion, and then simply put the conjunction of the two there. And that gives you a very nice non-directional notion of conjunction. Okay, once we have this, what kind of logic we get out of it? Well, I already said we no longer want to have commutativity and monotonicity, but we still want to have, I suppose, the principle of reflexivity. So we still have that. As far as I can see, we are no longer be able to show the cut is admissible. So since we still want to have cut, we should really add it as two extra principles. One time to cut on an anterior position, and another version to cut on a posterior position. Here you have some equivalencies for the connectives. And here where it becomes, I think, really interesting is that now we can define change using the atemporal conjunction, but the directional conditional. So if we want to define our standard example, change from rest to motion of the ball, we can say that that consists in the atemporal conjunction, that if the ball is at rest, it's already in motion, and that if it's in motion, it's still at rest, where we crucially use these two conditionals in those directions, and we put them together with the atemporal conjunction. The interesting thing is that once if we define CH of B, informal understanding is changing from rest to motion. Official definition is this one with the atemporal conjunction that I just explained. Then we can actually prove the principle of change that we had to simply build in the previous approach. Now, to say that if it's at rest and it's changing in case it's in motion, that's valid. That's just modus ponens for the forward-looking conditional. Similarly, if we want to go from motion to rest, we can do it if we add as further premise that the ball is changing on the left. We first say, well, first it's changing, and then it's in motion, then it follows that it's still at rest. And this again is going to be simply provable by modus ponens for the backward-looking conditional. Now, once we start to define things with this directional notion, we might try to go further. We might also simply take, for example, rest as primitive and define in this context of changing from rest to motion, we can define motion as simply no longer at rest with the forward-looking negation. So we define motion as no longer at rest. And then again, we can prove by the principle of forward-looking and backward-looking negation, now we can prove exhaustivity and exclusivity of rest and motion. This just becomes version of excluded middle and the law of non-contradiction. All right, and we can still prove that the relevant conjunctions are bad. We can still prove that it's inconsistent to say that the ball is at rest and changing and not yet in motion. That's bad. And it's also bad to say that the ball is in motion. Like conversely, it's also bad to say that the ball is in motion and still changing and no longer at rest. So we still have the bad conjunctions or the paradox of changing. Of course, we still block the paradox of changing because even in this more discriminating, non-commutative, non-monotonic framework, once we formalize the argument, we're going to arrive with a back conjunction here, simply derivable from two occurrences of the balls being at rest, and we still need contraction to derive the back conjunction from the simple assumption that the ball is at rest. So in terms of the analysis of the paradox of changing, basically the same analysis applies, even in this more discriminative framework. Okay, so that's the rest of the stuff. Well, let me skip that. So let me close on this slide. I opened a talk with this guy Cratylus that wanted to describe change. I thought the only thing he could do was to move his finger to follow what was changing. I think now we can do something a bit better than Cratylus in this non-commutative framework. We can actually give a full categorical description of what's happening when the ball is changing, and it's in terms using the directional conjunction and the notion of change that itself involves at the end the directional conditions. We can say that at the time of changing, what's happening is that the ball is at rest and already changing and already in motion. Or if you want to use the other conjunction, we can equally well say that the ball is in motion and still changing and still at rest. Now you might worry, you say, oh, but we shouldn't affirm this conjunction, because if we affirm this conjunction, we can affirm one of the conjuncts. For example, we can affirm that the ball is at rest, but then we can also affirm another conjunct, like that the ball is in motion, and then we get a contradiction. The ball is at rest, and we also get that the ball is in motion, which is bad. But that's not the case in this framework because of the failure of monotonicity. A directional conjunction now no longer entails any of its conjuncts. So that the ball is at rest doesn't follow from the conjunction there is at rest and already changing and already in motion. So it's a kind of logical holism, where we have something, a conjunction is true, but we can really say that any of its conjuncts is true. Like the truth is only this whole package. Any element of the package taken in itself is too abstract to be fully true. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say. Let me finish very briefly with something that is not logical, non-philosophical, but is an application of logic to religion. So we usually say that in Europe and Western Asia, that the really important intellectual civilization in the antiquity was the Greeks, and then the Romans were simply, so the Greeks were the thinkers, the Romans were the builders. They built aqueducts and roads, but they didn't really add much to thinking. Now that's not totally the case. There is a very interesting god in the Roman pantheon that doesn't have any equivalent in the Greek pantheon. I'd be interested to know if you know something about Amerindian pantheons, if you can tell me whether there's something similar in one of the Amerindian civilizations. Is the Janus god. Is the god of change, the god of passage, the god of doors, and so on, or the god of boundaries. And the usual representation is this one. It's like it's a young man that is forward-looking and an old man that is backward-looking. And I think it's quite inspirational given the philosophical and logical developments that we've seen in this talk. And with this, on this note, I end my presentation. Thanks. Yes.
And then we have some time for some questions. I'm going to start with Sarah, then Axel, then please keep your hands raised if I haven't called your name. Then Angelica, John, Mauricio, and Luis. So Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. So maybe you said something about this and I understood, but I mean, probably I've heard this question so many times and you hate it, but for most representations, transitivity is also needed. So I mean, of course, I know you are all for non-contractive approaches, others are for non-transitive approaches. What is your short answer why non-contractive and not non-transitive?
I have a clear reason for non-contractive, which is basically what I present. Is this kind of, I find once you start working with this notion of instability, I think it's natural to use it to try to represent this dynamicity you get at the time of changing. And that's really my entry point in terms of philosophical justification. So I find that plausible, so I'm going to go along with everything that follows from that. And what follows from that is a non-contractive logic. So that's why I like to go non-contractive in this case, because really the starting point is really not failure or contraction, it's this instability at the level of states of affairs in the philosophical story. That doesn't really bring about also failure of transitivity. Once you go for this more expressive system with failure of commutativity and failure of monotonicity, transitivity appears. Now it's a question whether we still have, we do have cut admissible in the commutative monotonic system. Is it still admissible in the non-commutative, non-monotonic system? That's the issue that very briefly, where is it? No. Sorry, yeah. Now, I don't have a proof. I haven't been able to see that these two versions of transitivity, or cut, in a proof theoretic framework, I haven't been able to see that these are admissible. So the system in itself, I still don't know, but there's a possibility that the system in itself doesn't yield transitivity. Well, I said, I don't see any reason to deny it. It still seems plausible given where I'm coming from. So I'm adding it. But it's true that once you give up, it might be true that once you give up commutativity and monotonicity, you actually implicitly have given up also transitivity. It's a casualty. So one might. So let's assume it's true, so I don't have always to hedge this with possibly. And so if this is true, then one might say, well, this shows that transitivity fails also, at least on the more discriminating approach, which is the one I prefer. So I might, there might be a path for still having failure of transitivity, even in this system. Up to now, even assuming this is true, the case where I find it plausible to fail is when you have little differences that don't make a difference, but can add up to a big difference that makes a difference. That gives me a very strong motivation for rejecting transitivity, in the case of vagueness. In this case, I'm open to it, but I don't see that we have the same phenomenon of little differences that don't make a difference, but add up to a big difference that makes a difference. So if, it's very tentative, but if that was my only reason for giving up transitivity, and I don't see it here, then it seems more plausible to add transitivity, even if it's not if it's no longer already delivered by the other principle. But it's, I try to stress that the point at which this is tentative and in which one can go more for a non-transitive approach. Up to now, I still don't see a strong reason for doing it, but there are these couple of places where the door is open, as it were.
Okay, so I think Axel was next.
Yes. Can you go back to the definition of directional negation? And while you do that,
I saw you were puzzled.
yes, I was definitely. But as you do that, I have an ad. We, Angeles Serrano, you probably remember here, and me. We have a paper where we do have connect paraconsistency logic with some ancient Mexican thought and some mostly indigenous thought. So
okay.
I'll
ask you the details later.
Okay, so the idea is something that I was puzzled about the way you presented change is that it was always between two positive states, right? From A to B or from rest to motion, things like that, and not from something to its negation, right? And Diana Rappman has stressed that if you do that, you're actually talking about different phenomena, right? But then in the end, you told us that, well, it doesn't matter because we can define the other one, but only with one of the negations, right? Only if you understand the change from going from P to,
Yeah.
I wrote it, to,
Should I move to? I move
Yes.
to the slides where I do it, no?
yeah,
Where is it? Yeah.
so
We
change
define-
is,
Yeah, we define MB as no longer.
No longer.
No longer. The
okay, but why not can we define it in terms of already, one is already not and the other one is not yet, or is,
Yeah, not yet.
Yeah, why can it be not yet?
so
Rest?
you can use not yet, but then you.
But then you're
so,
not gonna,
so if you want to define moving
uh-huh.
in this context where you're going from rest to motion, then you should say no longer.
Okay.
Because you're in this context where you're going, it's only in this context where you're going from rest to motion. You're right. If you were going in the other direction, from motion to rest, when the ball stops, yeah, then you shouldn't define as no longer rest, as not yet rest.
But every motion goes from rest to rest, right? Well, it may be perpetual motion.
It's not perfect.
Thermodynamics too.
Yeah, maybe.
That's not necessary.
Not necessary. Okay, so the idea is that change is always in a direction regarding to rest. And every change is either from P to not P or from not P to P. So that is why we are going to have sometimes have it to define it in terms of yet and other times with already, right?
Yeah, and even be.
Because there you said that this on the whiteboard that is a contradiction. But if it is possible to have motion defined in that way, then that should not be a contradiction. That should be a possibility for the backwards motion, right?
No, but that's exactly, no, you say rest, if you say the ball is at rest,
Yes.
and then you define, and it's in motion. And then you define motion as this. That's basically saying it's in motion. That's exactly what I want to have as consistent, to say it's at rest and then in motion.
But you just told me a few seconds ago that we could have another kind of motion.
Yeah.
But then the one on top would be a contradiction. Shouldn't be a contradiction. I'm sorry.
Okay. So the other one you're thinking about is when it's moving, when it's changing from motion to rest.
To rest. Yeah.
And then we define, so from motion to rest. And then the idea is to define motion, still we define, we
Yes.
take primitive rest.
Yes.
Which of course,
Yeah.
I think I said, this is totally arbitrary. No? One could
I know,
do it,
yeah.
okay. So we still define motion, but then if we are going in this direction, then motion defined in terms of rest should be
Not yet rest.
At rest.
Therefore, that should not be a contradiction. And yet, here you told us that phi and not yet phi is a
No.
contradiction.
But what I want to have as consistent in this scenario is to say that the ball is in motion and already at rest. That's not what I want to have consistent. No, it's in motion and then it's in.
Can I go to the board? Just a second.
Okay.
Okay, so here you told us that this was something you want to avoid, but this is an instance of this. So we want this to be consistent, but you already told us that this cannot be consistent.
No, once we are in this scenario, what we want to have consistent is this combination. Is to say, oh, it's in motion and then it's at rest. And we apply to this end, we apply the definition. Yeah. And this basically means that we want this to have consistent. Therefore, looking negation. Yeah.
Because of the other one.
Yeah, because of failure commutativity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So So if we are in this scenario, this is inconsistent. So an instance of this would be a rest and not yet a rest, which now is our definition of emotion. And that's gonna be inconsistent, but it's fine, because if it's going from motion to rest, it's gonna be you expect it's inconsistent to say it's a rest and already in motion. So yeah, it's totally it's totally crucial to understand what you get in terms of excluded middle and law non-contradiction with this directional negation. It's totally crucial to respect the order. You get a contradiction if you put backward-looking negation after what it denies, but you no longer get it if you change the order, because it can, like this, is looking. It says this is not the case in the past, as it were, but the thing you have it in the future, so you no longer have the clash of the contradiction. Yeah.
Okay, so we've reached the point where I have to strongly recommend that those with questions be as concise as possible, not mandatory, but please consider.
And also the answer should be.
Well, yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much for the talk. I just have a little question about the previous approach, like why this changing process is higher than
And the dialectic. Yeah.
why?
Yeah. Let me go back. Oh. This one, no? No, this one. So on the dialectic approach, you want to say at the time of changing, you both have the start state and the end state. So you both have that the ball is at rest and that the ball is in motion. Okay. But also they usually want to capture that the two things are exhaustive. I mean, there are several ways of doing it, but all natural ones are going to have as consequence the negation. So they're going to have both this and this. But that's exactly, if you have this and this, that's exactly a contradiction. So it's better you're changing from either this one to this. Just think of these now as a state in themselves. Like you were thinking earlier, rest and motion states. Now take the whole conjunction as a state. So you're going to have a change from the conjunction to its absence or vice versa. Like a second order change. So you're changing. So as I said, it's not because of the problem of the directionality. In this framework where we only have a normal dialectic conjunction, it's not clear. So we have now we have this big contradiction. It's not clear if that's like I was in the case of rest and motion, no? It's just right there. It's not clear whether once you have this, whether it's because you're going from this one to this one, or from this one to this one, because the conjunction is symmetric, so it's not going to reveal you any information about that. So for a similar reason, here again, it's not clear whether we are going from changing to not changing, or whether we're going from not changing to changing. But so maybe we're going only from one of those or from both. I remain neutral. But we don't. So that's why we have a second order change. So we not only have change from rest to motion, we also have change. Now let's take the negation first, just to be able to say something concrete. So we also have change from not change to change. That's the second order change. But then the thing iterates, no? Because if you have this is the negation of a conjunct. So in this kind of standard dialectic logics, if you have a false conjunct, you also have a false conjunction. Can also be true. But as soon as a conjunct is false, the whole conjunction is false. So because you have this, then we not only have the conjunction, we also have the negation of the conjunction. So I'm not going to write it all, but we have you have the negation of this whole thing. So here we had a change from not changing to changing. And if we have the negation, we also have not change from not changing to changing. So we have this third order change. And it iterates, because as soon as you have the negation of a conjunct, you're going to have the negation of a conjunction. So it goes up. So, yeah. So that's why we have it. And my claims are so I think this we have it. So what we make of this? I basically made two observations. I said, well, this seems a bit baroque, no? It's maybe some weird cases we have all this changing from not changing to changing, blah 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 blah. But ideally, we also want to have sometimes something simple where it's just changing and there's no more ambivalence than that. But yeah, no, yeah, this applies to every first order change is gonna explode into this infinite hierarchy of changes. That's more an aesthetic objection. It's Baroque, and Baroque is usually not very beautiful. I think more serious is the stuff I said earlier. That it's really so you start in rest, then you have the change, and then you have the motion. Here they want to say, because you have this, when you're here, you're also changing from not changing to changing. But in general, when you have start state, sorry, I'm taking
Quite some time, yeah.
But 1 minute.
I'm thinking this is important. This is worth it.
Yeah, I think. So in general, if you have start state, change, end state, and you're changing from start state to end state. What you expect at the end is to have the end state. So apply this idea here. Here you're also changing from not changing to changing. So what is it that you expect here? If you're going from not changing to changing, at the end you should have changing. But no, you don't have it. No, you just have motion at the end. Even by Priest's light, it's just motion. You're no longer changing. So you're changing to an end state, but once you finish the process, you actually don't get the end state. Not even by his own light. It's not that you get it and don't get it. Now we have contradiction, so we always have to consider the weird case where we both have it and not have it. No, yeah, even by its own light, we just don't have it. So that's why I call it conceptual solecism. You're telling me you're changing from not changing to change, but then at the end, I don't see that. No one sees the change. Yeah. So sorry.
Okay. So my suggestion right now is that anyone who really, really has to leave can leave now, no judgment. And I think there's 3 people left over. John, are you willing to? Yes. Okay. So we have 2 people left over and you're okay with
Yeah, I'm very happy to stay.
Okay, so
to stay on after the official closure.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So.
In the computer, we have design, logic design, and the easy cases are logical and arithmetical operations. So efficient that, say, only have to put more chips to make more efficient or more digits in a computer. hard cases are like vending machines. And this is like a vending machine because you have to design specifically to do not certain operation, like infinite credit. If you design a machine, you have infinite credit. That's the same in this case, because you have a relational or a cause without symmetry, no? Because you have a cause, effect, but you don't want symmetry between cause and effect, no?
Yeah.
But design logic, logic designs have an amount of literature of these states, and it's the first time I see formalizing finite state machines, because in engineer only have graphs and truth tables, and that's it all. Computers say are classical logical, but at the end something like this is very useful, because this can be used as natural deduction in design of a finite machine state. No?
Yeah.
So my suggestion is you can use these the materials and logical design to improve your work.
Yeah, thanks. These are some, constructive logic, the connection with this resource reasoning, because they keep track of how many times you need to use the premise. They have a very nice proof theory, and so once you go to the more expressive, weaker system with failure or commutativity and so on. That's also they might not be so nice, because, for example, I mean, there is this open question whether cut is still admissible in this system. There is a similar system that doesn't have multiple conclusions. There's a full classical lambda calculus that does have a cut is admissible there, but it doesn't have multiple conclusions. So it's they might, since cut is important in general, the admissibility of cut is generally important from a computational point of view. The particular system I propose here might not be the best one in the family, but there's something still in the family that is probably better from a more computational point of view. Yes, here the approach is more philosophical, even if the system is more ugly.
You need directions sometimes, no? O sea,
sorry, say again the last.
It's like if I pay, the important thing is this pay have managed to have only one product.
Yeah, that's it.
Even if this is like a metallurgical study, you have the same problem, direction.
Yeah.
No? So you can use this because also it's graphic, so you can graphic these states. No? Even if they are opposites in the metaphysical sense, no? But they have the same problem, direction.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so Luis, are you keeping your question?
I am.
Good.
No, thanks. I like all this very much, and especially now that I am no longer convinced by the story you told about persistence. Several years ago I was, but I am no longer convinced. So, and it has to do with the derivation that it's no longer
board, you say, according to the derivation, you end up with persistence, and if that's the case, then it is better for you not to have contraction. But the derivation, in the derivation, there are other ingredients involved. And according to the story you told about the failure of persistence, I don't know, maybe the guilty piece of information might be identity, right? Because that could fit more easily with the story about causation and so on. But anyway, there are other steps involved in the derivation, and those might be the problematic ones as well. That's one thing. Second thing, really short, related to the previous one, maybe we can have two forms of persistence, right? That one, but also the other one with identity. If reflexivity and phi entails psi, then phi entails
I put
psi.
in
Yeah, and
put in
that's
reflexivity as an extra an extra conjunct. Okay. Okay. Totally spot on. No, we have several moving pieces in the important derivation. It's basically reflexive, what I call I reflexivity. This is some sort of principle about conjunction. No, that if you have two conclusions, you can put them together in a conjunction by putting together the premises, and then contraction. So one can, but yeah, if I understand you correctly, one can say, okay, I buy into the metaphysical stuff about instability, but then the lesson I draw at the logical level, persistent phase, that's the immediate causality. But then the further lesson to draw is not to say the contraction phase, but maybe reflexivity phase, or maybe this principle of our conjunction phase. And then we still don't have, that still blocks the derivation of persistence, so it's all fine. And
or maybe not only contraction, but also identity or the principle of conjunction, but not only contraction.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. So if you want to go for a minimal mutilation, it must be exclusively one of these three. But there's no. I mean, maybe it's a multiple problem. So maybe, yeah. So there are also this reject more than one position, and I'm totally open to someone else doing it. I already made my bet on contraction, so I'm not sure I'm really going to investigate a lot the other option, but they're totally open, because the instability motivation, it so immediately only targets persistence. It only targets contraction because of this derivation, and there are these other moving parts. Especially, I don't even have to, up to now, I don't think I can say something very interesting, for example, about why not reflexivity, because you mentioned quite correctly that if you're thinking in terms of causation, then reflexivity doesn't seem like a very compelling principle, to say the least. No, and the paper where I developed this route from instability to failure of contraction, it was just basically stipulated. I say, okay, we have a theory of causation, and that's certainly not the relation there. It's certainly not going to be reflexive. It's not going to be reflexive either, because similar example that emerged with John's talk. But it's not going to be totally reflexive. So especially in the general run of cases, you're not going to have reflexivity. And I say, okay, now that we have this relation of causation, how we use it to define a relation of implication? And I said, what I hinted at here, I said, well, we just gonna take the basic cases of causation and we're gonna elevate them to implication, and then we're gonna close the relation under reflexivity, monotonicity, and transitivity, simply because it just seems a good property, at least in that context, for implication that causation doesn't have. So we really need to add it once we want to use causation to define implication. So it was this very, general, dogmatic reason. Yeah, reflexivity seems fine, so we just add it. So really, when I built the theory of implication from the theory of causation, there was really no interesting specific reason for having reflexivity. It was just stipulated because of some very general abstract ideas about implication. So that's why it's totally open to say, no, let's not, if we don't have reflexivity at the level of causation, let's explore the idea of not having it, even when we ascend to the level of implication. It's totally open. I think I put it as an open question in the paper where I do the construction. I haven't myself investigated that. I don't know if anyone has investigated that, but it strikes me as a very interesting line of research that can be pursued. Especially about, I think reflexivity has the advantage that if you start from implication, you don't have it, so why would you have it at the level of implication? This seems, the principle about conjunction, to me, seems more plausible. I'd be more interested in following the non-reflexive line, but that's also an option.
Quickly, your thoughts about the other version of persistence with reflexivity explicitly and the antecedents?
Yeah, then it wouldn't. On this view, if we reject reflexivity, then it wouldn't. While the original persistent phase, the modified one might still be valid. Whereas on my own, on the view that singles out contraction as a culprit, even the weakened version would still be a immediate causality of instability, simply because we're stipulating that the second conjunct antecedent is always true. So it's not really, it's logically weaker, but it's effectively not weaker because we're adding a conjunct that's always true. But if you take that line, then you can have these two principles and say one phase and the other one doesn't.
Okay, so this looks like a great time to wrap this Q&A session up. To wrap the whole conference up, pending some closing words. So join me in thanking Elia again.
Oh, thank you. And we are all hungry now, so I will be short. I just want to thank you all for attending this conference, the attendees, speakers, but also my colleagues in the organization, Eli, Thomas, and the people from the staff of the Institute, Alfonso, Yvette, and other people that you haven't seen yet, but Cristina, Karina, Christian, Manuel is not here, but also Maria and Lucia have been very, very helpful in the organization of this conference. Yes, I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you, and see you next time.